The sacred remains were buried with pomp at Memphis, the remains of this divinized Alexander. Pomp at Memphis, and by BC 311, Ptolemy I had constructed around the dead saint, doubtless as a pledge of his own legitimacy, a state cult with its own temples and its own priesthood. The latter, including the king's own brother Menelaus, the serpent cult, was Ptolemy Soter's face to the international scene. The Alexander cult was intended to consolidate his position in Egypt. Cult's propaganda promoting politics, that is, the king, the mark of the beast. So the kings always use religion to help them get to solidify their position in the throne. So possibly the Serapis cult was intended to have an effect in Egypt as well. He was, after all, an Egyptian god. All the early Ptolemies were pharaohs, but they do not seem to have pushed their prerogatives. The first evidence for an enthronement in the old Egyptian style dates from the reign of Ptolemy V, BC 203 to 181, a clear indication of the rising tide of Egyptian sentiment after BC 217. So, right here it says, in the days of the Roman Empire, the Egyptian goddess Isis was celebrated everywhere with an elaborate ritual and a complementary mystery cult. But she was not the first god to come forth from Egypt in Hellenistic times. Before her, the eastern Mediterranean was drawn, or rather summoned, to another Egyptian deity, Serapis, who owed his brief but brilliant career to the political astuteness of Ptolemy I Soter, as we've read. Some version or other of Serapis was current in Egypt before Alexander arrived there, and probably combined the features of Osiris and the bull god Apis. The cult center was at or near Memphis, and it was there that Ptolemy came upon it in its native Egyptian form. At this early stage of his career on the Nile, Ptolemy may still have been concerned chiefly with consolidating his position in Egypt, as attested to by his interest in the Alexander cult, but with the decisive events of BC 312, he stood full center on the stage of Aegean politics. His deliberate involvement in Sirius, Lycia, Greece, and the islands showed that his mind had turned to empire, and Serapis was to be his ecumenical god. The cult center was moved from Memphis to the magnificent Serapeum at Alexandria. A Greek sculptor devised an appropriate cult image, and the two religious eminences of the time, the imported Eleusinian priest Timotheus and the Hellenized Egyptian priest Manetho, took a hand at Hellenizing the liturgy and the accompanying myth. The result was a partially Hellenized version of an Egyptian religious phenomenon, intelligible, it was thought, to Greek and Egyptian alike, and eminently suitable for export. So Grecian ritual added to Serapis, packaged for export. They could sell it now. Isis and Serapis, deep ties. And over here I put Isis cult persuaded the Grecians. So Serapis did take up residence abroad in Sicily, Athens, and particularly with the Ptolemaic sphere of political influence on the Aegean islands and in the polis of the Anatolian coast. His personal reign proved ephemeral. The dream of empire dissipated as Ptolemaic power receded into Egypt, and the cult of Serapis suffered the congenital weakness of political religions. They expand and contract in proportion to the political power that supports them. It is likely that Serapis would eventually have retreated back into the tomb of Apis at Memphis had it not been for the connection with a far more potent figure in the same myth complex, his consort Isis. So religious political ties mention, Isis and Serapis, deep ties. So Isis and Serapis had deep ties.